Welcome to the Supplement Engineer Podcast. My name is Robert Chinetsky. Today, we are joined by a gentleman who holds a PhD in applied exercise physiology. He's also a licensed acupuncturist, a competitive bodybuilder, a published author, and the creator of Fortitude Training, Dr. Scott Stevenson. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Scott. It's a true pleasure.
You can just call me Scott. That's okay. Totally fine. People like that. The doctor thing takes off, but as you've probably heard, because I know you've listened on my podcast, I feel like it sort of creates distance sometimes. So anything other than a 4-letter expletive is fine for me. Guy, dude, what have you. Scott's totally cool.
Awesome. All right,
thanks for the intro.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here today, Scott. This is a true pleasure. So you've been around the industry of bodybuilding, supplements, fitness, nutrition for decades. I mean, you've been training longer than a lot of people have been alive. That's not to make you sound old, but it's just to show that your credibility in the industry, it's, basically unquestioned.
Thank you.
What was the impetus for you starting to train?
Well, I always thought, literally, I wish I had a better reason for the origin of this, but as long as I can remember, I wanted to lift weights when I was a kid. I didn't have like a comic book hero that I became enamored with or anything of that nature. I mean, of course, everyone has He-Man and Superman and all those sorts of things. That was around for everyone, but I just wanted to lift weights. And my mom wouldn't let me because of the myth that it would stunt your growth.
Right.
And, and of course, there are growth plates that can be more easily fractured, and there's a possibility there. But the whole idea that you're going to become, somehow there's some sort of a weight training induced dwarfism was something that she was just concerned about, being a very caring and loving mom. So I didn't get to start until I was about 11. But that was pretty early. It would have been probably when I was 5 if I'd had my druthers. So I started then, and I may have even snuck up before that and used some of my dad's weights. Mm-hmm. He had a weight set. He had some back issues about his discs, and did a lot of lumbar stabilization and that sort of thing on his own. He'd go and work out 5 a.m. before he went off to work. So I probably snuck up there a little bit, but I just always had the desire to do that. That was that and martial arts, and there was nowhere to do martial arts. I don't even know if there's a dojo or anything of that sort back in my hometown now, back in Illinois, but definitely you can lift weights there. There's some good gyms.
Right.
So, it was just always a desire of mine. And, not to go too far down that rabbit hole because we got some sciencey stuff to talk about, but it always seemed to me, even before I knew anything about the science of exercise physiology or muscle biology, that it was such a cool thing to be able to sort of exert your will on the nature of the universe, that being your body, and sort of basically create from that. It was almost like I can literally, as to use this old line from C.T. Fletcher, will the muscles to grow, so to speak. You can actually, you can mold yourself in a certain sense.
Yeah.
And that was just magical to me. That was like body sorcery in a sense. And I thought that was just cool. I just thought that was really neat. And I think that was why I was enamored with it. Kids like magic and superpowers. That was basically a superpower. You could wave a wand in the form of barbells and dumbbells and lifting weights and create your body in the way you wanted it to be. I thought that was just cool. That had intrinsic sort of curiosity provoking appeal to me. So that was probably it, I guess.
In all the years that you've been training, have you ever experienced dips in motivation where you just got sick of it and you just gravitated towards other forms of fitness, or have you always kind of had that burning passion, and training, it never really gets old?
I'm super lucky, man. I mean, I have done some endurance related stuff. I mean, I did, one point I was doing a lot of running, and when I was in college, I was still lifting weights. I remember there was a day I just had my mojo working, and I went and I did what was about a 12 and a half, close to half a marathon, about a 12 and a half mile run. And then I went to the rec center because I still felt great. And I did an hour of cardio on a stepper, and then I lifted afterwards. But I always loved lifting. I mean, when I was in college, I did the program. A buddy of mine, Paul Carter, who you probably heard of, we've talked about this, Cybergenics, was Franco Santoriello. You can look his name up. I'm Facebook friends with him if someone wants to find him. He was sort of the spokesmodel for this thing. And it was the most brutal weight training regime that I've ever done to this day. absolutely like mind-boggling. We could
Really?
go to that. Yeah, I've mentioned it on a podcast or two in the past, but
Hmm.
just ridiculous. And I did that twice while I was in college, in the
Wow.
summers.
That's
Yeah.
impressive because you are a guy that is known for training with, your balls busting intensity. So to hear that you found a program that's even more intense than some of the things that you do in fortitude training is pretty impressive.
I mean, everything was drop set. So like, I can, just to give you an idea, you train 6 days a week,
Hmm.
3-way split. So a Ronnie Coleman style training regime.
Hmm.
The diet was set up basically like kind of a low carb caloric deficit the first 3 days of the week, and then you would sort of fill back up. So sort of a rebound dieting type of deal. That's another program by Mike Zampano. And it would take we go in the morning, training fast. It would take about 3 hours to get through it. And that was humping it, like going as fast as you could.
Yeah.
For squats, I think you did this 5 times what I'm about to describe. Maybe it was 4. I think it was 5 though. You'd pick a weight. You could roughly a 6 to 8 rep max. You go to failure. This is just like, this would be really dangerous for someone to try to do who's reasonably strong. You'd need more than what we had spotter wise. So we didn't know. We
Right.
were young, dumb, and we're invincible. And you squat to failure, go to positive failure, forced reps, and then until you can no longer do a controlled negative. Drop it down, 6 to 8 reps again, positive failure until you can no longer do a controlled negative. Drop it down, forced reps, positive failure until you can no longer do a controlled. So that's 3 failure points. Then you would do jumps, like literally jump off the ground until you can no longer leave the planet, until you're no longer getting airbound. And then you would do just deep knee bends until you could no longer stand up. So you're just next to the squat rack, and you would do a forced rep, just trying to stand up out of the hole until you can no longer really control the descent, and literally would just fall to the ground. You would do a contraction, like contract your quads and your hams for 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, as hard as you could. That's 1 round. Do that 5 times. And then you go to knee hamstring curls after that. So it was just like that. It's just like ridiculous.
Wow.
I mean, I'm surprised that we didn't end up with rhabdo or something like that. I don't know how sore I was. And one of the years I did that, I was actually doing manual labor. I was working at like one of the clinics where my dad was a physician. I was like mowing lawns and like pulling weeds out of parking lots and just like helping change light bulbs and whatever carpentry, whatever they wanted me to do, I would do. I was outside half the day. I remember I would go, and it would be like Wednesday after no food, and I would literally, I'd have a lunch break, and I would just sit in my car, and I didn't care even I would just pass out. No air conditioner running. I would just pass out, just cold, because I'd gone through that, 3 days with like 1,000 calories a day. So so I did that one. That was the level of motivation I had as a kid to try to just, mold myself in the way I just sort of described. So I've always just loved it. It's been a release for me. It's been therapy for me. It's been a source of intense curiosity and self-exploration, meditation. So no, I really haven't. The longest break I've taken, I described in fortitude training, where I literally blasted myself into the hole with a similar type of setup, and then I just had to take the time off because I was just a wreck.
Yeah.
So, but I've always had the motivation. I've just been really lucky. I'm kind of blessed in that I found the passion, and it's still there. So,
have you maintained your martial arts practice over the years as well, or has that kind of fallen off as you've gotten more into meditation and bodybuilding and some of those practices?
I never really did external martial arts like a gung fu or karate or anything like that. We did qigong and tai chi when I was in acupuncture school, but I never found that. I never got to do the martial arts. Who knows? I probably would have been a black belt right now if I had directed my passion that way. But it's just the door never opened, so I never went down that path. But no, I haven't. To be honest, I really haven't done any tai chi or qigong in years now. I did that for all the way through grad school, and then for probably 2 or 3 years thereafter. And then I had some traumatic stuff happen. I moved to Florida, and I haven't really done much of it. I still remember a good bit of it. I have the forms. I could pick it up anytime, and I probably will.
Yeah.
I maintain my license, so I'll probably go back to that as I get older, I'm sure.
Okay. You started weight training at 11 years old. When did you actually start using supplements, and what were some of the first supplements you used?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, we haven't rehearsed any of these questions. Very trying to think. Um, I remember the first gym I trained at was called the Spectrum. It was in the basement of a building outside of I think it's called Washington Square in downtown Quincy, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
First gym I kind of remember training at, and God, there was all sorts of supplements you could, like boron was available, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and gamma oryzanol and Smilax. I remember they had Smilax. Yeah, and I'm trying to probably protein powder. I would be the first, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember some of the early things. Like I had this was back in the day when you had the powders and the supplements. Mainly they were like weight gainers,
Mm-hmm.
and they just were horrid. They're just terrible.
Yeah, cheap concentrates, maltodextrin, and a whole bunch of other carbs that just tore your stomach up and everything, I imagine.
Yeah, we just drank them. I mean, you just put them down. Just like you literally was just slam it. Just like a college guy chugging beer, you just had to get it down. The purpose was not to enjoy it whatsoever. It was just a means to an end.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. That's a really good question. I have to think. I remember those being there. I'm trying to think if I ever ordered anything, because you could order stuff like through like the back of
the muscle mags.
Yeah, the muscle magazines. Gosh, yeah. And I'm starting to remember. So there was in my when I played football. And this was another crazy weight training program that this quote unquote strength coach came up
mm-hmm.
with for the football players. This took me 4 hours to do, 3 days a week. He had us doing 98 sets, full body, 3 times a week.
Holy hell!
And I was the only one who did it. No one else did it on the team because it was just stupid and asinine. And then after that, we had all the drills for both offense and defense, and I played both. And then there was like an optional endurance run, and then I did all the stuff. It was like I did like exercise for like 5.5 hours in the morning, fasted, of course. And I tried to gain weight though, so I was drinking weight gainer at the time too, and protein powder. And that program was 98 sets, and everything was sets of. You pick a weight you could get for a set of 8, and the next set you wanted to get 7 or 8 with a minute's rest in between. And then the next set you couldn't get 7 reps, and then you would just move upward. So you would do full body. So you do like a squat that way,
mm-hmm.
and then you leg press, and you do a hack squat, and then you do a knee extension, and then you do a seated hamstring curl, and then you do a donkey calf raise and a leg press calf raise and the standing calf raise, and like you're working with like every exercise you could think of, everything in the gym. You did everything in the whole gym.
Mm-hmm.
It was 98 sets total. Abs, the whole kit and caboodle. It's just stupid, but I did it because, the more is better.
Of course, yeah. I think that would give Brad Schoenfeld a heart attack, and he's the one that just published that 45 sets per week study, and that had everybody in the fitness realm wigging out. Just shit, give them 98 sets a day, and let's see what that does.
There's no way with. I mean, some of it's probably age. With my current strength levels, I couldn't it would just I can train so much harder than I did then.
Right.
But at any rate, it's amazing that I made through that. That was just pure force of will, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being just like, I remember like people would come in, like the other players would come in, and they would just shake their heads at me, like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing what he said to do. Why aren't you?" And they was like, "Because it's stupid." I'm like, "Well, we'll see. I'm going to win. I'm a winner."
Yeah.
I had the Rocky mentality. So, but I was taking in weight gainer at that time too. I remember eating my mom got me frozen vanilla yogurt. It was actually fat free, which is stupid. But it was this like a quart of or several pints of frozen vanilla yogurt, and I have protein powder, and I think I mixed it with the frozen yogurt, and I managed to gain 10 pounds during the summer somehow, which I lost in 3 days of 2 days at football because there wasn't enough time to eat. I lost it all instantaneously, but that was God, that was brutal. I was sitting up at night like a bodybuilder, sitting up at night in the kitchen, forcing this stuff down, like by my everyone gone to sleep, and I was force feeding myself, trying to get it down. So, I'm glad I
Wow.
haven't remembered any of this stuff. This is fascinating. I didn't expect it to go down this path.
Well, it's all building into something. I
Uh,
think I've got a logical progression as when we get into our deep dive on some of
okay.
the ingredients that we're going to talk about.
All right.
When you worked, uh, before we started the recording, you mentioned that you did some work with the UT football team when you were at Masters at University of Texas Austin. Do you remember much of what their supplements were looking like? Did you recommend any to them?
I wasn't a GA. I was good buddies with all the graduate assistants there, all the meatheads. I was the meathead, but I was working in the lab. I was actually doing animal research, and I got involved. I just liked all those guys,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up doing a sort of interning over there for a while, just basically out of experience. And then I ended up doing kind of a research paper comparing the training logs and the strength logs they had from a previous summer where they took on there was a guy by the name of Angel Spazoff, who was the women's strength and conditioning coach. He stepped in one of the summers when they were between head strength coaches and trained the football players using a Bulgarian wave type of training split,
Okay.
where they're doing sets of threes and singles and doubles the way Olympic lifters would train.
Right.
For like squats and bench presses, and compared that with like a standard 6 to 8, 8 to 10, 10 to 12 type deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to talk with those guys a good bit and just kind of hang out there. And they were eating. They had all you can eat, of course, at the when they would go to the dorms,
Right.
and the cafeterias. Trying to think to that. You got to remember this was like 95 or 96.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what those guys would have been using. That was back in the day when Weeder stuff was around. I don't know. Some of those guys, some of them probably were super supplementing, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
But some of those guys were just the athleticism was just ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
just incredible. There was a young kid who came in. I don't know what even happened to him. He was he followed Mark Henry, who you probably know of.
Yep.
Who had previously held the state records in powerlifting in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, whose name was Chris Aiken. I don't know if he's been superseded since then, but he had beaten Mark Henry's high school records.
Wow.
He was like 850-pound squatter. And he actually had like a giant leg length discrepancy. He would kind of walk like, so it was amazing that his spine held out. And I remember him coming in and they were just testing, and he out squatted like everybody on the whole team coming into his freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of athletes you saw. So who knows? Those guys were just they were just so gifted,
Mm-hmm.
to make it at that level, especially at a school like UT Austin, a big football powerhouse.
Right.
That they eat whatever they want. They're eating Doritos and drinking beer and having hot dogs. And I don't know if a lot of them were really pushing, with the sort of a scientific type of approach. And I don't know if they had even what their registered dietitian was doing in terms of their food. Those guys just kind of, they were just so good,
Mm-hmm.
without having to do much. I don't remember much about the supplementation they were using. They certainly didn't have they weren't dispensing it in the weight room where I was.
Right.
In terms of protein powder or what have you. But most of them probably, it's funny because I would imagine like the third string guys, the guys that, played well in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and they just, maybe they walked on or they got on the team without a scholarship. Those were probably the ones using the supplements.
Yeah.
Because they just love football, but they didn't have, the genetic proclivity just to be a superstar.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what those guys use. That's a really good question though.
Yeah. What does your current supplement intake look like?
Oh gosh, let's see. The main thing it's all in the other room there, but the guys are in there working in my kitchen. It's been scattered with the home remodeling. Literally, I have
Mm-hmm.
like a wall of supplements where I have them a rack, and they've taken it off and put it back like 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've been on the road so much. Main thing I use is intra-workout nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking in, I've got some biocurcumin.
Mm-hmm.
I have got, let me run through the list. It's not a whole lot. I was trying out a joint supplement that wasn't doing anything for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Life Extension Arthromax that had, I don't even remember the ingredients in it. It was something that actually got lost in one of the times when they took things off of the wall. The intra-workout is highly branched cyclic dextrins with essential amino acids. I use a hydrolyzed whey in there. I'll have whey protein. For instance, last night I got very busy. I had a brutal leg workout, and I ended up just taking whey protein isolate and casein and making a 100-gram protein shake and slam that. I've got a multivitamin in there just in case.
Right.
I've been very good with taking in vegetables, especially in the morning. What I typically do is very much of a nutrient timing approach. So I'm getting in lots of vegetables on my non-training days.
Okay.
I'm eating a lot of salmon, so I'm not using an essential fatty acid like a fish oil, because I'll have salmon probably 5 or 6 meals a day, or a week. I mean, not a day, a week.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what else I have. I will sometimes, if I remember, I'll throw creatine into my which I should be using because I studied that. That was the focus of both my master's thesis and my dissertation.
Really?
It's been it's been a bizarre thing because literally these guys would come, like they show up and like, okay, today we're putting in the backsplash in your kitchen. So everything in my kitchen is now like somewhere else, like on the floor, and I'm like, oh, geez. So I'm just trying to like get food in as best I can, and this has been going on for months.
Wow.
What else do I have that I'm using? It's not necessarily. I'm finally switching back to lots of greenie, which has catechins in it, polyphenols.
Right.
Green tea extract is something I've tried in the past. It seems to work better, at least for fat loss, when you combine it with caffeine. At least from the that I remember looking at, yeah.
Right.
So I mean, I have things like beta alanine that I've included in the past. I've got a whole list of things that I've sort of tried out to see if I notice any ergogenic effect or what have you. But yeah, I'm very simple. Basically, it's creatine, protein, a multivitamin. I throw the curcumin in there. This one has some ginger in it, which seems to help with GI health. I haven't, because I'm not pushing up in my weight. I'm not trying to eat with a high volume of food, so there's no digestive enzymes.
Okay.
I'm not like practicing a carb, so I'm not using any glucose disposal agents or anything like that. It's really pretty simple right now. When I will diet, like yohimbine and caffeine and some fat burners, L-carnitine too. I'll start putting that in my shakes to build up the levels. But right now, like, it's just try to keep things afloat as best I can and just enjoy the training.
Yeah.
And have fun. Yeah.
Have you ever been a big user of pre-workouts, or what are your thoughts on pre-workouts in general?
That's it. It kind of depends on the person. If you're covering up fatigue, and basically making it more difficult to auto-regulate, because you're basically you're not able to tune in with what you need to do in terms of your training volume, whether you need to deload, whether you need to take a step back, then it's a Band-Aid. You're masking listening to your body, essentially. That's not good. Sometimes, just life is just a certain way. You can't train at the optimal time. Assuming it's not getting involved with your sleep. So like someone's not, like, for instance, working a 9 to 5, they're exhausted. They take in, there's so many pre-workouts that are just loaded. There was one, I think the max was like 550 milligrams of caffeine. It's something I saw, like there's just it's asinine. But I think especially a lot of the 18 to 24-year-olds who are using those things a lot of times have an insensitivity to caffeine already. So you need to have that in there to get that sort of placebo effect, get that recognition there's something in here. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It can help push you and help you get up for things in a way that you wouldn't otherwise, but it can be easily abused. And if your recovery is being hampered because you can't sleep at night, and then you're having to take, massive sleep aids, which some people do anyway. We've got a sort of an aberrant way of living nowadays for so much stress in our life. We kind of shot ourselves in the foot, I think, with modern society, because we have so much busyness all the time that now, like, if you compare how we lived as hunter-gatherers in eons past, where on the best estimates from what I've seen multiple sources that like we spend like 5 or 6 hours scavenging for food. The rest of the time we just have fun. We relax, have sex, play games, talk with one another. And now, we're like working these like 15-hour days and we can't sleep, and we've got all sorts of diseases of sedentary living and overconsumption. So people have to use sleep aids and those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. So as far as the pre-workouts go, it's something that it really kind of depends on the person, how well they do with those. Sometimes for a lot of bodybuilders, there can be this is kind of probably one of the most obvious things I'll say, but there tends to be an obsessive compulsive type of personality that fits with bodybuilding in many ways. So that could be something you have to watch out for. People will just kind of get hooked on those and then they're stuck with them.
Right.
There's not much they can do about it. So on the other hand, like for instance, you can still get it as for treating asthma over the counter. One of the best fat burners is ephedrine.
Yep,
works really. The research, they haven't done much for a while, but it works pretty well. The stuff with obese women's, it's relatively safe. The tachycardia tends to go away. The hypertension goes away, and so that's a stimulant. That's a pre-workout. That's one that can help people when they're dieting down and sort of keep going. As long as you know that you're using this for sort of a temporary reasons because you're dieting down, or maybe it's like, okay, I got to get this leg workout in. I promised my training partner we're going to do it. It was just a crappy week at work. I slept horribly because the pipes broke in my house or what have you. I'm going to do this now, but it's not a long-term solution. I think you're okay. But it's really so much of an individual decision to make, I think, that's based on the context of their life.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is the bodybuilding industry has largely been responsible for the massive swell in popularity of dietary supplements, especially pre-workouts, protein powders. As somebody that works with, both natural and enhanced lifters, do you find that a lot of them, do bodybuilders, the competitive bodybuilders, use pre-workouts as much as the supplement industry makes it seem?
I don't know how much they make it seem. Does it seem to you that everyone uses them?
Yeah, I mean, because you've seen the ads in the print magazines and online where they've got a guy that says, "Oh, I use this pre-workout because it helps me fuel my training." But as somebody that is well within their mindset, they understand that obviously the pre-workout is not making this guy jacked and tanned. It's a lot of hard work. It's proper diet. It is not the 300 milligrams of caffeine and the pixie dusting of all the other ingredients.
Right.
So somebody that coaches competitive bodybuilders with, on a regular basis, do you find that they use them that much? Or is it it's more show and that we're just trying to get more of the average lifters to use them?
I discourage it with folks that I work with. Like a cup of coffee, not such a bad thing. But I try to like some of those are they're outrageous. What's in there?
Yeah.
I really can't imagine, especially for someone who trains later in the day. And a lot of the research suggests that the best athletic performance happens like late afternoon,
right?
As well at least what little is out there. So if people are doing that and they're amping themselves up, I just can't imagine sleeping very well. I mean, I just can't imagine, caffeine can last quite a while. Histamine, there are people who are outliers who metabolize that very, very poorly.
Right.
I just can't, you don't want to get in that. And those tend to inhibit appetite as well. So if someone's trying to gain weight, that's not a good thing.
Correct.
For most folks. So, but I don't know that I work with the cross section that maybe, you're thinking of, because I have the people who come to me, I've sort of, it sounds kind of snobbish, but I think, okay, where can I best lend my particular talents? And I've worked as just a trainer, like 9-to-5er for many, many years, and kind of take on everyone. And I help people all the time for free. But I think, well, if I'm going to take someone on, they've got my book now, my Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book. I wrote that to try to do a brain dump and get all that information out to the people who want to learn. But most of the clients who come to me are folks who've already thought this through, what we're talking about. They wouldn't be someone who, doesn't quite know. They've already got their diets. Most of the time when people come to me, they already have a diet that's already set. They've already got a really nice supplement regime. They've done a lot of things, and they've kind of pushed themselves to the limits of their knowledge, or they've come to some sort of a crossroads. And it doesn't typically end up being someone who's jacked up on a bunch of caffeine, for instance.
Yeah, and that's
Now,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I've run into that before. That's when I now as people are starting to diet down, and so peak week is coming to be an important part of people's regimen, what to do there. And I have a way of doing that. You don't need to do peak week if you're in shape. There's no reason to do anything necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had people. I had one person who was taking in like 2,000 milligrams of caffeine a day. He was a personal trainer. Yeah, I know. It was like, I can't remember. It was like he was drinking like a pot of coffee in the morning, and then he was drinking like Diet Mountain Dew throughout the day, and like taking some no-dos on top of it or something like that.
Holy cow!
It was just massive. And that person, of course, we had trouble dropping water because caffeine is one thing that's really, really nice, powerful, but relatively mild, of course, on the system, diuretic. So I would have people who were, if they're dieting down, they're using 400 milligrams of caffeine as part of a fat burning stack a day, and they might up that to like 600, something like that.
Okay.
On the day before a show. But if you're at 2,000, going to 3,000 is going to do anything.
Yeah.
You've already desensitized yourself pretty much. You're just running on fumes, and this is just keeping the fumes flowing, up towards your nostrils. If you're taking in that much caffeine. So I've run into that before. But I think a lot of that is like the young kids who are just doing what I did and what's totally normal to do. Like, I mean, we know that's what young people do. They explore drugs, they explore supplements, they explore sex.
Yeah.
It's just part of like the normal like maturation cycle to like go and try shit out. The unfortunate thing, like you say, is that the supplement ads in the industry is there not to provide education in a well-rounded way. It's not like you see an ad that says, "So here are the benefits of this supplement, and here are the negatives. Please weigh this as a mature adult would and make your own decision." No, that doesn't sell shit.
No, it doesn't.
That's not fun. That's not sexy in any way. So a lot of those people, I think probably if you looked at like the segment of bodybuilders 18 to 24, competitive or non-competitive, they're probably, that pre-workouts I think are a huge seller. If you look at like any supplement company, you have to have a pre-workout in your line.
Right.
A protein powder, a pre-workout, etc. But if you look at people who've been at it for a while, in their 30s or 40s, they'll use them selectively, or they use them when they diet down, but not all the time. So unless they absolutely have to, like because they're having to stay on those on stimulants because they're dieting down and they're just running on fumes, they can't sleep, and they're pushing the limits of bodybuilding because they're a competitor or they're a pro level type person.
Right.
So, but it depends on who you're talking about. As far as the use, I would imagine. I think it's the 18 to 24. You would know this better than I. They're the ones who are buying most of the supplements.
Yeah, and it's in a few discussions I've had with a few brand owners. It's surprising that females are actually a larger part of the consumer base than men are with certain brands. I'm finding, which surprised me more than anything, because I would assume that guys are going to be the ones that are buying pre-workouts and stuff like that more. But when it comes to protein bars and the meal replacement shakes and even pre-workouts and fat burners to a certain extent, females make up a significant portion of the purchasing population.
More than 50% is what they're thinking.
Yeah, that's what I was led to believe.
I think, I mean, I've seen that and I've heard that too, is that, I mean, when it comes to like beauty industry types of things, at least in the Western world, obviously females more so than males, they're buying cosmetics. Guys are starting to use cosmetics now. You see young guys and boys who are putting on makeup, and it's become more acceptable.
Yeah.
But women are buying all the beautification things, and the fitness industry is it's an extension of that.
That's true.
It makes sense. You look at like the infomercials, what they're trying to sell. A lot of it is geared towards women because we have this, our societal perception is, and I've talked to so many women about this. They're like, it just sucks because a woman who's like, 40, she's over the hill. Like she's an old hag, right? Like, I mean, I say that facetiously, and that's not my opinion whatsoever, but that's kind of like the societal opinion. Like, unless you're like once you're out of your 20s, like you're old, whereas you can be like Sean Connery, and you're sexy until you're 80. Guys can do that, and that's not fair, from a
Right.
societal perspective. But women have much more pressure, I think, to maintain their looks and their skin and their body weight. And I mean, look at what you'll so often you don't see. Although you'll have cougars with sort of trophy men,
Right.
but more typical, it's the other way around. You've got the large sugar daddy who's in a power position, and he's got young trophy wives or girlfriends or what have you. That's a more typical thing. So I mean, that's sort of an extreme example, but I think it does capture an aspect of our society. So it makes sense that women they're looking for everything they possibly can to maintain that youth.
Right.
So it makes them suckers for the supplement industry. Yeah, very much so.
As somebody that, you've got one foot in Western science and one foot in kind of Eastern medicine, how do you straddle the line between deciding when to use a particular new supplement that hits the market or recommend it to some of the people that you may work with? Because we all know that things like creatine, beta-alanine, betaine, citrulline, stuff like those are more of the quote-unquote proven commodities in the industry. But every now and then we have every 3-4 months there's a new ingredient that has got 1, maybe 2 human studies behind it and a load of animal literature backing it. At what point would you feel comfortable yourself using a new ingredient or recommending it to clients?
I like to experiment with stuff when I can just add it in. And I have this in my book. I wrote an article for Elite FPS where I kind of touched on this idea, is that in an ideal world, you would have everything consistent, and you would basically be adding one thing on your own, and you give it a trial and see what you may actually. And in a really ideal world, you'd have a friend who would blind you to what it is you're taking, and like you would have a placebo period, and then you do a crossover.
Right.
If you really want to give it a go, because the very nature of placebos is that we don't know, but we can't tell whether or not we're amenable to the placebo. It can get us no matter what.
Exactly.
And we're not necessarily conscious of what's happening. So with me, it would be if someone has disposable income and they have sort of a curiosity of that sort, they want to just give it a go. And it's just because they're exploring. It's sort of like, someone who's got a hobby and, they work with hot rods in their car, in their garage. And like, I'm going to get this new chip that'll supposedly give me better gas mileage. And it's the new hot thing that I see everyone talking about. I don't know whether it works or not, but what the hell? This is my fun. I love to do this shit. They throw it in. It hasn't stood the test of time. They're just doing it for the hell of it, If it's a client who's wanting to know my, sort of get my expertise on it, I'll say, okay, this is icing. I have a nutritional hierarchy of importance in my book, and supplements are at the very tip top, like literally. I mean, people flip flop that around sometimes.
They certainly do.
Yeah, they'll try to use supplements to cover up a bad diet and shitty training, and it doesn't work out very well most of the time. So training, and that's just the nutritional part, but the training has to be in place too. That's sort of the driver, and the nutrition is part of the support for recovery. But I would say, well, let's take a look at everything else you're doing. Look at budget, of course, and that fits budget and interest is sort of like, can you add this in, and it's not going to like keep you from eating regular food because you're spending $60 a month or $60 a week on some highfalutin substance or supplement. And if you've got all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed, and you basically you don't see any unknown variability in performance or weight or those sorts of things, you've got a pretty good handle on stuff. Okay, now we can give it a shot and see what you think.
Right. And
it would, of course, entirely depend on the supplement and what it's supposed to do. So I'll ask people sometimes, I'll say, so what is it? What is that? And what does it do? It's like, oh, so-and-so, it'll help like get you huge. I'm like, well, how does it work? Like, what's it do? Like, what's it supposed to be doing? And like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, let's figure that out. Like, let's make this an educational deep dive into whatever the supplement might be, as much as that person can do. They may not have, the education, the knowledge of human physiology or biology to really do much of that, but at least they can go and you get on Reddit or you get on Facebook and at least gather like the opinions, be they valid or not, and say, okay, so-and-so says this, so-and-so says this. And then, I'll give them my opinion on it. And by that time, most of the time they're like, well, screw that. I'm not spending my money on that. They don't want to do it most of the time.
Right.
So, but really, it's like consistency. Here's a quote for it. Consistency trumps everything.
It certainly
Really.
does.
Yeah. If you can just like do the basics, train as hard as you can, make sure you're recovered, sleep, eat to the best of your ability to make all those other things happen,
Hmm.
then you're going to get a long ways. Um, if you're someone who's like, at the pro level as a bodybuilder who's trying to, win shows, win the Olympia, that sort of thing, and you're looking for any edge you can have, then you might have to pay attention to some of those things. Those little itty bitty differences can matter.
Right.
I started a new podcast with Paul Carter and Alan Aragon. Actually, it's kind of it's been making some noise because of Alan's issues in the past, which we cover on the podcast. People can get a look at that and make up their own minds. But one of the things that we talked, I don't know if we talked about on the podcast, but Alan and I had an interaction way back when on Intense Muscle about nutrient timing. And I kind of faintly remember this. This was like over 10 years ago. And Alan kind of stepped in. He's like, "No, the data doesn't suggest nutrient time. It does much, blah, blah, blah." And the counterpoint that I made is that, and this really applies to any sort of supplement, is that for someone who's looking for just a small edge that will summate over time, let's say that you get, you're going to be someone who's going to gain, I'm going to just throw some numbers, you're going to gain 30 pounds of muscle over the course of 5 years of training, and you can get an extra 5% out of that. So the extra 5% would be a pound and a half, maybe 2 pounds of muscle. That can make a difference. That can be visible if you can add that up over time. Or let's say you can just get an extra rep or two in the gym because you're using some ergogenic aid for each of your exercises. So instead of getting 7, 8, 9 reps, you're getting 9, 10, and 11 reps, and that summates. That stimulus summates. It becomes additive, even maybe sort of synergizes with everything else you're doing. And the next thing you know, you're squatting 450 pounds instead of 400. That will be visible,
absolutely,
in your physique, I would think. So those little things can make a difference for someone who's at the very high and elite level, but they have all the other pieces in play. So it kind of depends. It really depends on what else you're doing. Are you going out? Like, I have people ask me all the time. This is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. People run into me when I'm out somewhere, the hardware store, the grocery store, and they'll ask me like, what supplements you take to look that way, or what do you eat, or of course how much do you bench, and those sorts of things too. Yeah. I really don't bench. Like, that's an easy out. I don't bench. I'm like, oh. I have a bunch of funny answers we can get into. One of the things I will say to them, I say, hold on. First things first. You tell me, what are the 5 things you aren't doing that you should be, or that you are doing that you shouldn't be, if you want to look better and feel better than you do now? And they'll be like, that's a good question. Sometimes I have to repeat the question for them. And I'll say, like, do you drink on the weekends? Like, oh yeah, I go out with okay. Do you think that helps with your body fat or gaining muscle? No. Okay. Well, what do you eat when you're out drinking? It's like, oh man. So they tell me that. I'm like, are you exercising? How often do you go to the gym? It's like, well, it's on or off. Okay, so you're not training regularly. Most people can come up with all those basic things, and it's a great answer. I've been using that literally for years, and it's a great answer to get people oriented towards the basics, because we're looking for magic bullets.
True.
We're looking for, like, what's like that. Like, if I could say, I'm taking I take 90 grams of arachidonic acid every day. It's like okay, there would be some people going to GNC looking to buy like jugs of arachidonic acid.
Oh yeah.
It would be just crazy. And that's the power that these athletes, the spokespeople you'll see on those ads have, because there's so much allure, there's so much power in that. It's I have a whole talk that I give on why you don't look like a pro. That's the title of the talk, and I go into the genetic variability and biological individuality, and I talk about how there are people that are extreme responders, and many of those people who do look that good, they're not there necessarily because they're so much more intelligent or crafted in how they put together their training and diet. They're there in many cases because they just got great genetics. They chose the right parents way back when, before they made their way into the world. And people just don't realize that. They just don't get that, because it's our bodies and it's our self-esteem. And there's also this this reticence to say, gosh, no matter what I do, I'll never look like that guy, like that woman. It'll be impossible for me to do that. Dave Henry was my training partner, and for years, and I will never look like Dave Henry. Yeah. There's not really anything that, like, Dave didn't have some secret he was hiding from me, because I was coaching Dave, and I still do help Dave. It's not like, Dave has like this whole, like, this vast area of like hidden knowledge that he's kept hidden from, and that's why he's the pro and like I'm the amateur. It's because Dave has badass genetics, and he trains really hard, and he does do the right things, but it's genetics that put him above. So people are looking for something, some secret, something external to themselves in many ways, when it's really just a matter of just, your habits and the basics. Yeah. In many ways. Yeah. No. So that was a long answer to that question.
No, that's perfect. And that brings us to our ingredient deep dive for this episode, which is on the topic of new ingredients. S7, which is a new nitric oxide boosting ingredient from Futureceuticals, which is one of the developers of new ingredients in the supplement industry. That Futureceuticals is one, Nutrition 21 is another, Compound Solutions is one. And S7, so it's a blend of all these phytochemicals from vegetables and fruits, for the listeners that may not be aware. And there's a study published in Humans that is claiming that it enhances nitric oxide production, endogenous nitric oxide production, by 230%. And so you and I were talking this back and forth that, if it's a blend of all these antioxidants, we've seen literature previously that high doses of things like vitamin C and vitamin E can blunt the beneficial hypertrophic adaptations that resistance training induces. And so in your review of the literature, can you kind of walk us through what you've learned about S7 and what your thoughts are on it and the study itself?
There's only that one study that I'm aware of. Yeah. They've got the researchers, what's the first name? Starts with an N. Let me see here. I've got the studies pulled up here on my computer.
Nemser?
Nemser, yeah. They've done some other work with similar types of supplements. When you're looking at a study like this, first you did a nice job of, it's only, I think, a total of a 50 milligram supplement. It's a blend of various polyphenols, things that have variety of actions. There's chlorogenic acids in there, which is in coffee. There's EGCG, which is in green tea. What else do they have in there? Other than the catechins, anthocyanins, curcumin, a small amount of curcumin. Yep. So these things all have antioxidant actions. In this case, they measured that they are actually inhibiting some of the enzymes involved with producing free radicals like superoxide and the other reactive oxygen species. So they found, in this case, that happened. Now, that's a nice overarching global thing. Free radicals cause cellular damage. This particular study, took a blood sample, capillary blood, and they were looking at blood cells. So first thing you need to do when you look at a study of any sort, really, is say, who or what did they study? Were these rats? Were these mice? Were these humans? What tissue was this? So blood is a type of connective tissue. They're looking at the cells in this blood. Blood actually, like, technically, there's 4 tissue types in the body, and connective tissue is one of those, and blood is one form of that connective tissue. They also found that it reduced oxygen consumption by inhibiting mitochondrial oxygen consumption as well. There was a reduction in blood glucose levels. So what they did is they fed 2 different doses of this supplement. I think there's a 25 and a 50 milligram dose with breakfast, with a standardized, like, bread-based breakfast, just a standard sort of, they called it a standard breakfast. Not something I probably would have eaten, but it was what they gave their subjects. There was actually a reduction in blood glucose, and there was an increased antioxidant scavenging ability in the plasma. And they had various ways of measuring that I'd have to dig in really deep to see what the pluses and minuses are of those. But I think they're pretty well established biochemical assays. So first and foremost, these are blood cells, which are different than muscle cells. There wasn't an exercise intervention here. There wasn't a performance intervention here. what they found was a change in basically antioxidant status, which is a good thing, generally speaking. There was something that they said is that these were apparently healthy subjects, but the antioxidant status of them, let's see if I can find the exact quote without looking through here. The mean value of the examined subjects was in the range, they're talking about, actually this was a bioavailable nitric oxide concentrations. The mean value of the examined subjects in the range of 26.4 plus or minus 6.7 nanometers. That's based on the way that they measure that. The values are not typical for healthy adults, but are in fact typical for the aged persons. So they had an increase in twofold increase in circulating nitric oxide hemoglobin following administration of both the 25 and 50 milligrams. So there was an increase in nitric oxide in the blood in this scenario in the tissue that they sampled. So what I'm pointing at here is something that's known as external validity. To what extent can we take these findings and apply them to other situations? If we studied mice, does that apply to football players at University of Texas at Austin? Well, I mean, mice running a maze are different than football players, running plays on the field trying to score touchdowns. In this case, we've got blood, and there's obviously an effect there that all these ingredients in the supplement are known to have that kind of antioxidant action in various ways. Some of them also elevate intracellularly by acting on the antioxidant response element genetically, the level of the enzymes that are involved with free radical quenching. So they literally have an effect in increasing the cellular capacity for quenching free radicals. It's antioxidant scavenging ability. So that's not found, or they measured here. I don't think, at least, maybe I missed it, but basically this is consistent with what you find with these ingredients, but not in skeletal muscle and not with exercise, although it was with humans. So that's cool. It's a great start, but it's one study, and it's the type of thing, of course, that I imagine will go on ads. It will be a good way to put this ingredient into a supplement, a product of some, as sort of one of the key ingredients in some sort of a product. So that's a big overarching look at what this study kind of tells us. So the other thing that you pointed out, and this is a big topic, I think maybe why you want to look at this, because it's something I've touched on before. I mentioned in my book. I've written articles on it, especially vitamin C, vitamin E. Actually, N-acetylcysteine has the same effect.
Right.
There's a resistance exercise study with the muscle damage and soreness. And one of the things that is going on when we're stimulating adaptation in skeletal muscles, we're applying the stress of the weight training. We're producing what ends up being damage to some degree. You don't want too much, and inflammation. And part of that signaling process is through free radical production. And there's the studies with there's an animal study showing, I believe it was a compensatory overload was limited when they administered to these brats. They take out one of the plantar flexors, remembering the study properly, and there was am I with you? You're nodding your head like this is the study. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. So I don't know about humans as far as resistance training goes, but there definitely is as far as adaptations to endurance exercise in terms of mitochondrial biogenesis, improvement in insulin sensitivity or glucose disposal. So something about the free radical stress seems to be an essential ingredient in bringing about the adaptations to exercise. It's part of how the stress is signaled. And if we blunt this with literally what are megadoses, like a gram of vitamin C and 100 IUs of vitamin D, that sort of thing, you can stop those things from happening. So the question then becomes, how much is a megadose, and how much is too much? And there's also, this sort of falls into the idea of a hormetic response, or the idea of hormesis, whereby some amount of what you would consider toxicity or a toxic stress, like what you could say a free radical is, will bring about adaptation. And there's an optimal amount, and then there's what is too much. Right. So you can actually I mean, radiation will do this sort of thing. You can actually produce hormetic stresses with radiation. Radiation is not good for cells in general. You get the same thing with UV radiation. You'll bring about adaptation. If there's too much, this is an easy sort of notion to hold on to, is if there's too much UV radiation, you go out and you get sunburned. That's not good. You'll get scarred. But if you have a good amount, then you'll have a nice tan develop. If you just stick your head out in the sun and you come right back in, unless you're a vampire, you're not going to get enough to have anything happen. So that's at the low end.
Right.
So you've got this inverse U scenario where eventually you can go bad, or you get so much of a stimulus with this toxic or hormetic stress that you actually have a maladaptation.
Yeah.
That would be sort of overtraining in the sense of an exercise adaptation, or something that causes a decrement in performance, or would actually literally cause, in the case of muscle size, maybe even a reduction in muscle size or loss of strength. Because you just did too much. Imagine you go in the gym and you try to do one of those asinine workouts I talked about.
98 sets on legs, yeah.
Yeah, or the cybergenics, and you're basically untrained. You would have rhabdo would be what might happen to you, and you would be a happy camper for quite a while. You wouldn't come back. They've actually done muscle soreness studies in older folks and found there's shifts in MRI contrast that last for months. And older folks are more amenable to muscle damage. They're highly sedentary in many cases. Maybe a function of the aged muscle, just the fact that they've been inactive. So back to this supplement then. It's a very, very small amount. And this study doesn't really point to how this particular blend would be affecting skeletal muscle. But the thing that I'm waiting for, I haven't looked, it's been about a year, but there's a categorical difference between taking in vitamin C, which in and of itself is an antioxidant, and taking in nutraceuticals or plant-derived compounds, the things like the EGCG, the chlorogenic acids, curcumin, etc., that tends to inhibit free radical production or elevate enzymes of free radical quenching, because that basically is feeding in to the molecular machinery of the cell to improve its ability to quench the free radicals that would be produced with any type of stimulus, inflammation, a muscle stress like exercise that produces damage and inflammation thereafter. So that's the thing that I'm interested to see, is whether, like, if you were to take a group of individuals and you maybe do a crossover, a study basically designed so that you increase by supplementing over a long period of time the cellular, especially in skeletal muscle, not blood per se, because that's nice to know, but skeletal muscle biopsy is a little bit different than taking a capillary blood sample.
Right.
A little more in-depth procedure, different tissue type, etc. And to what extent would that then help the cell better manage that inflammation and that stress, and maybe even have a better adaptive capacity? Are you increasing in some way the cellular resources to manage the stress of exercise so that you maybe optimize it in some way? I don't know. I'm not even sure. Because you can obviously produce more stress by doing more exercise. Right. So if you undertrain, so to speak, you don't get the optimal amount of training volume or training stimulus. If you do too much, then you've gone too far. One thing you can do with something like a vitamin C or vitamin E, and I've actually mentioned this before, I knew some powerlifters who would have days where they just go bonkers. They wanted to train really hard and do lots of high effort, max effort reps in a way that would be just destroy them muscularly. They'll take like NSAIDs, load up on aspirin, and they'll go in and have a crazy day, and they get stimulus for the nervous system. They get to practice all these singles and doubles and triples, and the NSAIDs keep them from being so broken down that they can't train normally the next week. So in that case, you're able to you could use something like an NSAID in this case, or if we're talking about antioxidants, to shift you from a point where you're too far over in terms of the stimulus back to where you have sort of an optimal stress to maximize your adaptation. So that's with like just the blunt administration of like vitamin E or vitamin C and cysteine, something that is that quenches free radicals in and of itself. That's a different question here with what we're talking about with phytochemicals, phytonutrients, because now you're feeding, as I said, you're feeding into the cell's ability to quench those things,
Mm-hmm.
and that you would think is a healthy thing, unless it makes it such that you do end up dampening the stimulus. Because the interesting thing is, and now you're making me think about this actually in a new way. I hadn't planned on going here, but I'm going to just go with it because it seems to make sense. Is that really what we're doing with muscle with resistance exercise, trying to increase muscle size?
Mm-hmm.
As you've heard me say this a million times, it's kind of an unnatural act.
Yeah.
We're producing a muscular callus, and the muscle adapts to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very odd thing to pick the weight up and down repeatedly. We're exploiting those molecular mechanisms that increase muscle size.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just speculating here, if you then have somehow made the artificially or through supplementation of these phytochemicals in a way that how much green tea would you have to drink, and how much of various herbs and spices which you have to take in order to match what you could do with some of these supplements.
Right.
Have you now increased that free radical quenching ability in sort of an unnatural way, such that the cell is so able to cope with that free radical component of the stimulus for muscle growth that you now basically give the cell another option
Mm-hmm.
to just simply quench and get rid of the stress in that way, as opposed to growing more muscle mass, increasing the contractile material, and becoming stronger, which also reduces the stress.
Right.
If you're bigger and stronger, picking up 100 pounds isn't nearly as tough
Mm-hmm.
as it was the year before when you weren't as strong. If you've got greater free radical quenching ability in the muscle, because you've super supplemented, so to speak, with these sorts of herbs and spices in a way that you would have a hard time doing, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to look at the equivalency to know, but if you've done that, maybe then the cellular machinery, the evolutionary wisdom of the molecular machinery is able to say, we can actually handle and resist this stress simply because now we've got the capacity to quench the free radicals and prevent that damage from happening in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It'd almost be, and this is maybe a stretch too, but almost be, and this might be even easier for folks to understand. Imagine if you could come up with a retroviral vector that would transfect into skeletal muscle a gene that produces a cyclooxygenase inhibiting chemical.
Mm-hmm.
So basically something that would do just the same as an NSAID. So now you've basically enhanced your muscles with non-steroidal anti-inflammatory capacity. You blunt all the normal things that are set in motion.
Mm-hmm.
That, in a way, it's an odd analogy, but you see where I'm going. That's sort of what you could maybe do if you were to take in a lot of these things. But I don't know. I really don't know, and that's a total hole in my. I'm sure people who study this, and this is what their careers are about, probably know that there's some limit to the extent to which you can upregulate these enzymes and inhibit them.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe taking in massive amounts of a supplement like this won't have that effect. But I haven't seen anyone do that. I just see the data to see if there's, as I suspect, a categorical difference between vitamin C and vitamin E and acetylcysteine and things of that nature, and the phytonutrients, which have a really very, very different mechanism of quenching free radicals.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those are my thoughts on this singular study, which is cool. It's a good starting spot, but that's what I'm thinking about it as of this point.
Yeah, and then one of the other things is that this was also done in people with metabolic syndrome. So would a healthy individual, would it have greater capacity to boost nitric oxide? Would it be dampened, since maybe this is counteracting some of the inflammation and other things that are going haywire in people with metabolic syndrome, to where this would be more effective if you are sick, and if not as effective if you're healthy? And then it could be the instance also of that maybe this is boosting your ability to perform, but it's going to hinder muscle growth for all the underlying mechanisms that you touched on earlier, to where you're robbing Peter to play Paul in one instance, to where, yeah, I can perform better, similar to what you're saying when you're taking a massive dose of NSAIDs, but on the back end, you're not going to get as much of a growth or training stimulus, but you were able to just perform better. So I'd like to see some exercise studies on this, and I'm also this is the inner skeptic in me, in that the dose is so low, and you're getting such a massive, potential increase in nitric oxide. When have we ever seen a compound outside of certain special sports supplements that you can take such a minute dose of and have such astronomical results? So that's another thing that's in my inner skeptic. So
yeah, well, this is just in the blood. So this is where that was. I don't know. There may be different ways in which each of these phytonutrients make their way into the blood.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't measure, what was actually getting in, to what extent.
Right.
It may be that some of those things never even made their way into the blood. They got some really minute amounts of some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, curcumin. Curcumin is very poorly bioavailable. I don't know if the 1 point, there's like 1.2 or something like that milligrams of curcumin. I don't know if that, made its way in there whatsoever. So we don't really even know what's actively affecting their results here, because they didn't measure blood levels, I don't believe, of any of the compounds. So
correct.
The presumption, of course, is that something in the S7 is making its way in,
mm-hmm.
But it's just affecting what they're measuring there in the blood sample.
Right.
And so this is not in a situation where you've got an exercise stress that's turning on nitric oxide release, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting. You've got like scenarios where once you've got a stimulus of exercise that really it's quintessential to survival, being able to fight or fly, so to speak, is you've got, like, an example that pops to mind is no matter really what has going on nutritionally in terms of glucose availability, when you're exercising at high intensity, your glycogen use is going to be pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a higher intensity exercise situation, glycogenolysis rates proceed according to the energy demand of the exercise, because glycogen is going to be your main fuel, right, aside from creatine, phosphate, initially, and those sorts of things. It's going to be the main fuel for anything lasting, longer than about 5 or 10 seconds up to, several minutes. So the cells are just set up to do that. So if we've got an exercise situation where you have to have increased blood flow into the skeletal muscle, blood flow can increase tremendously in skeletal muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, much, much more. The increase in skeletal muscle blood flow is about 3 to 4 times what the heart could provide to the whole body at once. So cardiac output can go up, maybe 6-fold or something like that in a highly trained endurance athlete, from like 5 liters per minute to like 30. But if you measure, so that's really impressive. Most people, it's more like fourfold, like 5 to 20.
Mm-hmm.
But someone with a big heart can do that. But if you look at the skeletal muscle in of itself, you do like isolated exercise, just like a knee extension type of thing. Mm-hmm. The increase in blood flow there is tremendous. It's way beyond, if you were to do whole body exercise, it's way beyond what the heart could possibly provide.
Right.
Because skeletal muscle can do that. So the increase in blood flow in skeletal muscle is tremendous. Whether or not this small amount that has this effect just on the blood cells would have any magnitude of appreciable effect on actual blood flow in skeletal muscle during high intensity exercise, when the blood flow can go up just tremendously, mm-hmm. Is actually a pretty dang good question. I missed some of your first question. You were cutting out on my end. They did study healthy subjects here, but you said something about, if I'm reading this right, just looking at the abstract and then reading through in that quote that I read, they're talking about, they called them healthy, but their levels of NO2 were more like those of older folks. So they picked out people who were apparently healthy human participants, N equals 8. But you had a question, which is a good one, I think, anyway, but I didn't catch it because the feed was a little wobbly on my end.
I thought I had remembered reading something about some of the subjects had metabolic syndrome. So I'm wondering if it's because they've got certain underlying issues. Is that what is making the boost in NO more successful than if they were completely healthy and didn't have any underlying symptoms of metabolic syndrome?
That's a good question. Think this through a little bit. There are certain sort of courses with people who have metabolic syndrome. It is largely, it fits along with sedentary living, mm-hmm. and the standard American diet, which may not include enough fruits and vegetables, right. which may not include enough phytonutrients. So I'd be willing to bet if I dug in the literature, I wouldn't be surprised, let's say it this way, if I dug in the literature and you looked at antioxidant status of people with metabolic syndrome, that it is probably poorer than healthy folks.
Right.
And you could probably trace that back to diet. So if these folks may have been more responsive to at least their blood,
Yeah.
the blood cells of these individuals, if they had metabolic syndrome, because basically their diets were deficient in these things. So whatever was turning on, whatever about these compounds that was turning on or inhibiting or having these effects, probably would have been of greater magnitude in someone who wasn't taking in these types of phytonutrients. So yeah, I would bet for sure.
Yeah.
That's pretty true. It's like if you take someone who's pretty healthy and you put them on a healthy diet, well, you won't see much change in their health. You take someone who's not very healthy and they're not eating a healthy diet, put them on a healthy diet, you'll see a bigger change. So yeah, I would tend to agree with what you're thinking.
Yeah, and bouncing off what you just said, that's why I'm always surprised when these studies come out and then you see the attention grabbing headlines that your multivitamin doesn't work. I'm thinking, what do you expect from the multivitamin? It's just supposed to fill up any of these little holes in the gap. It's not going to turn you into Hercules, Superman, or make you drop 50 pounds. I mean, you got to have realistic expectations for what you're supplementing with.
Yes, yeah. So this is interesting. I don't know. You know better than I do. I know there's a variety of sort of specialized supplements like this one. They put together a very small amount. They've shown an effect here. Without a doubt, there is a statistically significant effect. I don't know that, like I said, you're going to see an ad where people are going to make it clear that we tested the blood of healthy subjects and we saw this, and there's no exercise. They will give you the headline: improves antioxidant status, or quenches free radicals, or something along those lines. That's what this literature for the FDA. They're supposed to have some sort of mechanistic data to support your claims, although it doesn't happen most of the time. Did you see the report? It's been several years ago now, where the FDA kind of did a self audit on products. I can send this to you if you like, and I think they went into and they just picked out like 79, something like that, products, and they went back and looked at the substantiation that had been put forth for the label claims, and literally none of them met the criteria the FDA had set out. Like, have you seen this?
I mean, we get some of these studies every couple of months. Dr. Peter Cohen, who's over at Harvard University, has done 2 reports within the past year and a half, both on different pre-workouts and stimulants in there, and each time he's tested them. And I mean, he's just going and grabbing them off the store at like a GNC or something. So I mean, there could be various QA QC issues with the transport, and you could definitely poke holes in the study, but basically only 2 of like the 10 or 12 products he's looking at have the actual amounts of stimulants in there that they're claiming on the label. Some of them are 2 or 3 times higher, some of them are 2 or 3 times lower. So there are massive oversights within the industry in regards to quality control with some of these brands.
And that's of course that's been an issue for forever. I mean, then there's of course tainting with illegal sports supplements and those sorts of things, supplements. But this was a function of looking at the substantiation for label claims, not necessarily testing testing how well they tested out when you did an analysis of the contents, and they were feeding things through the FDA, and they did a self audit, and they looked at how well are we actually making all these manufacturers adhere to our own requirements, and none of them were. They were like something like this. Like this one actually is a good study. I can't say for sure, but it was with human subjects. The claim would be improves antioxidant status. They've actually got some substantiation there.
Right.
They can't say it improves exercise performance or quenches free radicals to make you stronger and faster or something like that, because those data aren't there. But they've actually got something in human subjects, whereas some of this could have been like an in vitro study, and where they just like added it to some cell culture of some sort and looked at what happened there.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that would make it onto a label claim in some way, shape, or form. That is not cool with the FDA if they're providing a supplement for human consumption that doesn't fit with their criteria. So they don't do a very good job. So a lot of things that are out there are making claims that are just like they're not substantiated up to the FDA standards, and the FDA is not paying attention to their standards, at least as of a few years ago. So I'll send that to you. Remind me, and I'll email that study to you.
Yeah, please do. And it's my issue is that a lot of companies have already jumped on the bandwagon of this ingredient, and they've already started putting it in their products and advertising it. And if you go on the Futureceuticals website, I pulled it up. It says it's designed for use in products that target performance and muscle building athletes, those seeking products supported by clinical research, active lifestyle consumers. But none of the study didn't test for any of those variables. So we weren't using resistance training as one of the variables. They weren't testing any kind of exercise protocol. And then it says the benefits are it's plant-based, which is one of those trigger words these days. It's one of those eye-catching ones. Small dose, clinically tested, and then increases NO by 230. So and then it says applications, of course, pre-workout, muscle pump, and So it's I'm not sold on it yet.
Maybe there's something we're missing. Is there another study somewhere? I didn't find one, but
no, this is the only one that's been published to date.
Okay. Yeah. I hate to say, because you never know. Sometimes, like you say, there's no other studies, but maybe there is. But I think you're right. I looked. I didn't see. There was nothing on the website that I could see. So, yeah, that's what it kind of comes down to is what can people claim,
right?
And people just want to claim whatever sells. It doesn't. The truth of the matter doesn't really make a difference.
Correct.
When it comes to the truth of the money that can be gained in selling the product.
Yeah.
So. It's funny because I've had a little bit of interaction too, and I'm not going to provide all the context, but there have been times when I've gotten a hold of the researchers because I've seen things and I wanted kind of know, and I've actually contacted the researchers and said, can you tell me this is what is being said about this product? And when I read your abstract and I look in your paper, the data don't match. They don't substantiate that notion. Was something or sometimes the abstract will say something different than what the paper actually says. And I'm like, was this just a typo or what's going on? Can you tell me what you actually found here? Here's my question. And the times I've done that, it's like, oh, well, I don't remember. We don't have the data anymore or something like that. It's, and I think maybe those are honest, could be honest answers. I'm not saying someone's lying to me, but those sorts of things happen. There's all sorts of sort of misinformation that can be projected forth. Like in this case, this seems like misinformation. Don't get myself in legal trouble, but it sounds like from what you read there, they're definitely overstepping what I would call external validity. To what degree can we externalize these findings to other scenarios like exercise, resistance training, or what have you? Doesn't seem to be there. Right. So I'm glad you're doing this podcast in this way. This is one. It has been for years. When I was doing research, I was at a college position just for a couple of years, and that was one of the things I wanted to do was dig in and basically shoot holes in some of the claims. I wanted to single-handedly be the sheriff out there in the wild west industry, just start shooting all the bad guys with research. That's why I studied creatine. Just at the time, I remember I'd done my master's thesis on creatine. It was starting to take hold, and my doctoral advisor, I mentioned, what I'd done, and he didn't know the literature as well as I did at that time, but he knew it just come about, and he's like, okay, let's see here, this is, he was very, very, very skeptical about it, and obviously it's panned out pretty well as far as creatine goes,
right?
But, there's so much bamboozling out there. There's so much to be done, and it's a shame. I don't want to say there's a catch-22. A lot of the labs have to support further research. So it's kind of like you rob Peter to pay Paul, I guess, as they say. So you do some research that brings some money into the lab so you can do other research you consider more meaningful. And that those data, although you've done your due diligence as an honest academician in putting forth that information as you see it in the literature, and you read the paper. I don't think they overstep their bounds anywhere as far as conclusions.
No, they didn't.
Someone else doing that,
Right.
So it's like you're feeding. It's kind of like I don't want to go into a political issue here, but it's sort of like if you work at a gun store and someone has every right to buy bullets, and you have the sense this guy's going to do something really bad with these bullets, or this gun. You're like. I'm not killing anybody, but I have a sense if I had my choice, I wouldn't. in this. So I wonder if those researchers, I'm literally providing ammunition here
Mm-hmm.
for people to sell things in a way. And who knows, maybe this will pan out to have some ergogenic effect. Who are we to know? I don't know.
Right.
We don't. I mean, we really don't know. Maybe it's possible, But I think your skepticism is warranted.
Mm-hmm.
But gosh, I sure wish the supplement industry were a little more, at least kind of upfront. I will say that. I want to say dishonest, but upfront, and saying this is what we know, not like designed for this. It's like, oh, how can you possibly say that?
Yeah.
It hasn't been tested in athletic populations, much less, as an ergogenic, test of any sort. So
Exactly.
yeah, that's a great topic. I'm glad this is this is like a quintessential example of what happens a lot.
Oh yeah.
I think, yeah,
Yeah,
well as anyone.
it's an all too common story in the supplement industry, and that's the main reason I got into here was to try to help separate the truth from the BS, because there's so much garbage fed to consumers, and if I can just save one person one $30 bottle from wasting it on a product that's not going to do jack squat for them, then that makes my day. So it's one of those things. So I'd love to see more research from the lab or from Futureceuticals on the ingredient. I'm just not sold on it yet.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. It's interesting. Did you see where and how they came up with the formulation, what the rationale was for putting those things together in that way?
No, I have not. They have another ingredient called Spectra 7, which is another blend of phytochemicals from a bunch of fruits and vegetables. So I'm wondering if they just
Right.
maybe refined it a little bit more for certain redox signaling compounds and other things that enhance the antioxidant capacity of cells. I think that may be at play. I'm just not 100% sure.
Yeah, it's called. I found one called Spectra.
Yeah,
I
that's
didn't see the
the
seven, but
older brother of this one.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and that one has it's a full spectrum antioxidant product, proprietary combination, and that has a boatload of stuff. That has the whole kitchen sink in it. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, who knows? Maybe they did. There probably was some pilot work that maybe they didn't mention.
Mm-hmm.
Where they found they can whittle this down to the smallest amount to get some sort of statistically significant or a substantial effect. The real question is, and this is always the kind of the question with science, and this came up in the podcast. Came up a couple of days ago when we did that podcast. It'll continue to come up is the difference between statistical significance and practical significance.
Exactly.
Does it really matter? And that's connected to the external validity. So yeah, it increased, nitric oxide production in blood cells. But unless you're going to go at the beginning of a race and do a blood draw and hand them a venipuncture tube, and that's going to help you win the race, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It needs to make you faster or stronger or be able to jump higher, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so we'll see what happens with this. But I imagine, that's the thing. It's like, it's almost, I hate to say it, it's sort of it's a misuse of science, and we can be easily blinded by it. It didn't used to be like back in like 20 years ago, you could say whatever you want, and they have like all these fake graphs. And now we've got legitimate science that's being used. And that's just another way to sort of bamboozle people in many ways. Because you literally, an average person trying to pick up this paper and read, I don't know what most of those assays were they're doing. I'd have to go and look at the reference methods. I could eventually tease it out, but I didn't want to spend 20 hours doing that. It was immaterial for the purpose of this podcast.
Right.
But it's like, it's just Greek or Latin to most people. It's just crazy. So you just kind of nod your head. You read the abstract if you go that deep, and it's a shame because I think if you use, and I have this in my book, if you look and just look at the big things, they were healthy volunteers. Like you said, was there any exercise? No. Was it muscle? No, I'm worried about muscle. No. Okay. It was blood. Well, that's not quite the same, is it? No. Like common sense, just spending literally about 15 seconds, and you can get a really good handle on the external validity, the practical applicability of this study. The question will be whether they actually cite it when you see those ads. And for people who don't know, if you're online or on your phone or what have you, you can literally just swipe an entire reference starting from the first first author's name to the page number, and paste that into Google or go to scholar.google.com, and you'll find the abstract almost 90% of the time at least.
Yep.
You can find those papers. So you can read the abstracts and get, okay, that was bullshit. That was in mice. That was in cell culture. It wasn't in people. They weren't resistance trained, etc. So you can do that. You can actually, with literally about 30 seconds of your time, get a really good handle just with common sense and no scientific background as to whether they're trying to sneak something in as really substantial, applicable science, or if it's just a way to add some bells and whistles to an ad. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the last point I'll make on this before I beat this any further into the ground, is that a lot of the times the companies aren't selling this ingredient as a standalone so people can understand what it's doing. It's packaged in with citrulline and or nitrates and or a cell volumizing ingredient like taurine or glycerol or creatine, betaine, some of those kind of things. So it's, how much of your muscle pumps from this pump pre-workout are really attributable to S7 and how much of it is to the other 16 things that are in there? It's just... So it's another soapbox I'll jump on another day, I'm sure.
It's a big one. That's why, like, I could go in the other room and show you, like, where I have my creatine, I have beta alanine, I have citrulline, I get this stuff from True Nutrition. I'm not trying to plug them, but they're just a good source, and you get certificates of quality, certificates of analysis from them. And I add my own ingredients. It's cheaper. I don't mind doing that. I got the mad scientist gene, so I like to kind of make my own concoctions. But that's the way to know. And if you find something works, it's unfortunate. A lot of times, what are pretty good products, they vanish, they go away.
Yeah.
So if you're someone who's planning on bodybuilding, especially if you're a competitor and you want to use something on a consistent basis and you can get the individual ingredients, there's nothing worse. And I've seen this happen. Like, let's say, like back in the day when we had like some of the fat burners that, like, Hydroxycut was an example. Remember that?
Yep.
And that worked pretty well from what I remember.
Yeah.
And then I remember that it's like all of a sudden they changed the formulation. It's like you can't get the good stuff anymore. Yeah. It's like, well, shoot. So people, like, that was a key ingredient in the fat loss stack for many people back in the day. And so, like, some sort of supplement with all these ingredients, that you might add that in and find that it works, and then it vanishes, and you don't know what worked and why. So if you can come up with the basic ingredients, and then you know what it is, like, okay, I lost my source of beta alanine, I can go find that elsewhere. So that's why I'm big on not having the proprietary blends and so many things together that have overlapping actions.
Correct.
Yeah. Plus, like, when it comes, like, this is a small amount. It's 25 or 50 milligrams, but I've seen people too who they will use everything. Like, they will use all of the ingredients in what are the clinically evidenced doses for each of them, and now you've got overkill. Like, you're feeding into the same mechanism from everywhere. It's like, do we really need to, like, pour water from the pitcher and turn on the sprinkler while it's raining in order to water our grass? Like, the rain's fine. We don't need to do it from all angles. All you do is flooding things out and potentially creating hepatic toxicity, for instance, as well. So, anyway, that is a whole other topic. Maybe for a later podcast, we can go into that one.
Absolutely. Dr. Scott, thank you so much for this. I've kept you on for an hour and a half. This has lasted longer than I imagined, but it's been an amazing conversation. Thank you for being so generous with your time. This was outstanding,
Absolutely.
And we'd love to have you back at some point down the road to discuss some other... We can get on a couple of other soapboxes with regards to the industry or something.
There's lots of them. We'll just leapfrog from soapbox to soapbox.
Sounds good. Thanks
for doing what you do. Before I go into that, like, what you're doing is very, very cool. I mean, this is one of my major pushes, is to try to, like, increase intellectual honesty, increase, knowledge, smart consumerism, and you're doing this in a phenomenal way. So I'm happy that you're part of the industry.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I appreciate it. You mentioned several times the podcast with Paul Carter and Alan Aragon, the Swole Trinity. When can we expect that to land in iTunes and all the other podcast apps?
Oh, well, actually, you can see the live podcast we did on Facebook right now.
Yes.
It's on my Facebook. It'll be just a few days. I think usually it's like 4 days for, so we did on Wednesday. I guess by probably next Monday. So today's the 26th. Oh, definitely by the beginning of May, I would think. the very
Fantastic.
latest. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, those are going to be good. Alan's a really bright guy.
Mm-hmm.
Paul is outspoken as all hell. He's having a blast. I think you watched it.
Yeah.
Lots of F-bombs and, 4-letter expletives. We sort of let
Mm-hmm.
loose in a way different than what I did here. Obviously, I don't hold myself back, but it's much more, at least so far, we got some pretty high energy bromancing going on with the three of us. So
Awesome.
It's fun. But all those guys are just so bright. It's going to be high quality and a lot of fun to do. So definitely tune in for that. I don't know where we're going to go, but it's going to be good places, I think.
Excellent. I'll make sure to put a link to the live video of that in the show notes. Where else can people find you at?
Oh, all my websites lead to fortitudetraining.net, beyourownbodybuildingcoach.com, or just byobbcoach.com. That's like my big brain dump I'm trying to get folks tuned into. It's got information about hormesis and sort of general supplement categories and ergogenic aids. Some of the stuff I'm guessing you probably have it,
Mm-hmm.
the book. So that's got my ideas on supplements being at the top of that nutritional hierarchy of importance.
Right.
And then Instagram. I was a reluctant Instagram adopter, but I'm on Instagram
Mm-hmm.
at fortitude_training. And then you can just type in Scott Stevenson bodybuilding or Scott Stevenson meathead, and you'll find me pretty easily. So not hard to find.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Scott, for this, and have a fantastic weekend.
Yeah, you too, brother. Appreciate it, man.
All right.